Hi, everyone. Thank you for checking out this week's episode. I wanted to jump on and offer a small reminder of the ways that you can connect with us. The first way is our socials. So we are Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram and Natalie K124 on TikTok, my personal Instagram. And you can find us on YouTube and Pinterest under To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. The second way is by becoming a Patreon member. We are well on our way to our 25 member Patreon, where we are going to unlock bonus perks to being a patron member. Shout out to all of our existing patrons. As an independently ran and funded podcast, your support means everything. Another way that you can connect with us is making sure to subscribe and leave comments wherever you can so we can start reading reviews on each podcast episode. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure to check out the merch store, and we will see you next week. Tolerators. This is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, the show where my guest and I chat about how our brains have just been so conditioned to not like ourselves, and that serves the patriarchy. Today's guests are from the podcast The Imposter Syndrome Club. I am very excited to talk to Alice and Jessamy about their show and how imposter syndrome is one of the many tools of everyday misogyny. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Natalie.
Yeah.
So lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having us. We've been sort of like quietly stalking you on the internet for the last couple of months. And I feel like I know you so well already. So it's nice to like catch up with an old friend.
I love to tell people that there is no shortage of me on the internet. And people have asked me, have you ever thought of stop sharing? And I'm like, but why? Then people feel like they're my friend and then I get new friends.
Exactly. Well, you're talking to two confirmed oversharers here, so.
and two new friends. It's done. This is the Faustian pact. Like, you don't realize it, but we're homies now.
Oh, I didn't even have to wait until the end of this episode to be like, hey, so here's the trick about To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. Once you're on once, you're my friend and you get to come back whenever you're pissed off about misogyny. Not that it'll ever happen again, but you know.
Well, we're super excited to chat, Nat. Thank you so much for having us.
No, thank you so much for being open. It was so funny because we literally came up with this idea because I wrote something dark that I was still processing about the holiday season and my depression. And I'm like, get off the internet. You are still holiday gloomy. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to tell these strangers something in this box here. And then you all were kind enough to be like, we should collaborate sometime. I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to go from I hate everything and I hate the holidays and it's winter too. Do you want to be friends?
I feel like we really could just start like a December support group because
100%.
this I feel like not everyone, obviously, but many people are carrying around the secret guilt for not having the holiday experience that you think you're supposed to have.
Yeah.
So we released an episode around Christmas time about our feelings, essentially, and feelings around Christmas and being childless at Christmas and how things change and traditions and, you know, what it looks like for you without your own quote unquote family, which I think is a bullshit thing to say anyway, because I have a fucking family, even though I don't have children. There, we're getting heated already, ladies. But so we'd recorded this podcast, essentially just Alice and I chatting about all of that stuff. And the response that we got was incredible. And I know that personally, it made me just feel a lot fucking less alone, which was awesome. So to have you reach out, I was definitely not like, I'm going to sad sack over here. I was like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, I'm on day 7 of just tear crusted face, just being like, my birthday sucked and Christmas sucked. And I don't know, do you want to hear about it? And you're like, we do.
So much. Why did your birthday suck?
My birthday is on Christmas.
Oh, buddy.
Yes. So once your Christmas goes downhill, it's really hard to like kick into gear to be like, and I'm happy I was born.
Oh, that's a fucking rough one. My heart goes out to you, Nat.
I tell people all the time when they go, your birthday's on Christmas, I go, yeah, I never had a chance. I never had a chance to not be codependent, attention seeking, like love starved. Like your birthday's on Christmas. You have to compete with the idea of God.
You're like, I never got a star above my birthplace. I never got strangers traveling across the continent with gifts.
Where's
None of
my
it.
3 wise men?
Where's my frankincense?
One time, my sister did say, because I don't know what to say when people tell you happy birthday on Christmas. So I usually go with Merry Christmas. So I'm coming downstairs and I go, and my sister goes, happy birthday. And I go, happy birthday, baby Jesus. And she goes, fuck the baby Jesus. Just like out of her mouth without even thinking about it. Fuck the baby Jesus. And then my dad tried to cancel Christmas. He was like, you're done. It's 8:45 in the morning.
It's happened. What so the story, like for the timestamp on this story, like I'm imagining a sweet little 5-year-old sister being like, fuck baby Jesus. Was that? It was like last year.
Yeah, it was a couple years before COVID. We were fully fledged adults, and she said it without even thinking, and then she realized what she said, and it like dawned on her face that like thank God we were in the comfort of our own homes. And then it's like, joke's on you, 3 years later your sister's gonna start a podcast. And everyone's gonna know that you told that baby Jesus to fuck off. Fuck him and his manger.
Nobody is safe in the world of a podcaster.
Could our sisters please have their own 3-way podcast? It's just them being like, fuck this shit.
My sister famously, she'll never hear this because she doesn't listen, because her answer is, why would I listen to your podcast when I could call you? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe you'd learn something about period stigma. I don't know. We're already off to a great start. Tell me how your podcast came to be. Like, what made you guys want to start it? What is it about imposter syndrome that you were like, that's it, we have to start talking about it?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to take this?
Yeah, do it.
I host a monthly breakfast networking event called Creative Morning. So it's actually a global event. You'll probably have one in your city. It was started in New York and now it's in 223 cities all over the world. And each chapter has a host. So that's part of my role is to host that monthly event. And every month has a global theme. So every city has an opportunity to choose a theme. And in 2021, so during lockdowns, and so we're both based in Melbourne. Melbourne had some of the longest and most harsh lockdowns of anywhere in the world, so we're all pretty fucking depressed. Yeah. And we had to do that event online for the whole year. So about mid-year, the theme of dare came up. And also during this time, while we're all just fucking miserable and dealing with the inside of our own brains, Alice was also going through a divorce during that time, which, as you can imagine, is super cool when you're locked in the house with that person.
It was rad.
You were with them.
I was, yeah.
Just
I mean,
looking at them, being like, well, I guess I shouldn't just put you out on the streets during this global meltdown.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, on so many levels, I was so fucking lucky. Like, as far as any divorce narrative can go, I do feel like I got the best possible iteration. Like, it was the end of a 14-year relationship, but one that it ended because we were just friends and not partners. So it kind of at least was, it wasn't, the fuel being added to that breakup was not this like passionate, fiery trauma trigger kind of fuel. It was actually just two housemates anyway. Yeah. But obviously it was fucking sad and shitty and like not ideal to have to then live with that person for another 3 months. And I think Jess and I had gone for a walk, or we'd had like a socially distanced, very outside walk or whatever. And I think you just knew that I needed like something, just anything outside of that house. Yeah, it's just like, here's a project.
Yes, pretty much exactly that. And I also thought that the topic was beautiful for Alice in so many ways. So I invited Alice to speak on that topic. Part of what we do, both of us do the same sort of work. It's called graphic recording, which is essentially live illustration. And there is a daring element about that because it's basically improvised drawing in front of people in real time. So there's that element of it. But then she'd also, 5 years ago, moved to Australia. Her and her then husband moved to Australia from South Africa. She had to completely start again, make new friends. So there were so many things I saw in this incredible woman who I'm lucky enough to call one of my closest friends, that she's just a fucking badass bitch. Like, she's so daring and so awesome that I'm like, what better person than to speak on this theme? And also give girl a little project to work on. Yeah. So this is a very long-winded story, but we're getting there. So Alice called the name of her talk the Imposter Syndrome Club. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what the talk was about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, God, I'm not trying to remember like what the fuck I said for an hour, but it was essentially just like throwing together pieces of what felt like thinking, and I'm sure you can both relate to this, like when there are a few loops you've got in your brain at any given moment of like the stuff that you're chewing over and trying to work out and trying to kind of solve for yourself. And that had definitely been one. And it kind of felt like, okay, here I've got to do this talk and do this presentation. I just want to like make it fit the thing I'm thinking about anyway. And that was this idea of being an imposter syndrome. And I think with the work that we do quite a lot of corporate work, but we're the token creatives in the room.
Yeah.
And often, and as you go higher up in organization, often the male to female ratio starts shifting as well. So there's all these elements happening kind of within that. Yeah, it was just, it's super interesting to me. And I also just thought it was a fun title. Like, it was that simple. I was just like, right. Lol. Yeah, so I did the talk, and it was, I think, also testament to the title. I just remember people responding so well and booking. And I say that as like no credit to me. Like, I hadn't said shit at that stage. It was the title that was drawing people and hitting a note. Yeah. And afterwards we were like, fuck it, there's more to this.
Well, you're downplaying it a little bit, Alice, because like, yes, there were lots of registrations for that event. And I think that's right, because so many people, I think particularly in creative fields, go, well, yes, absolutely, that's me. Like, as creatives, we're constantly doubting ourselves because there's no, like, you don't get a certificate that says you are an artist, A+. Well done. So I think that's something that creatives experience a lot. But then also the feedback that we got after Alice's talk was incredible from people in all sorts of different creative industries. And so at that point we thought, there's much more conversation to be had here from a whole lot of different perspectives. So yeah, we started a podcast.
And thank goodness, because so much of my internalized misogyny comes out as imposter syndrome. And when I think of the common denominator in all of the ways that I feel like I'm impostering something, or I'm faking it till I make it, or whatever, the question that always comes up is, well, who am I to, and then fill in the blank. Like, who am I to break up with him? Like, I'm just going to find someone better.
When we first started doing the podcast, actually, a friend of mine sent me an article, which I'll share with you as well, because it's an interesting one, from the Harvard Business Review. I think it was titled something like "Stop Telling Women They've Got Imposter Syndrome." So obviously, like, it is a pretty gendered thing. Not saying like, of course, men experience imposter syndrome too, but the whole sort of premise of this article was around, by saying, oh, you've got imposter syndrome, and at every fucking conference she was going to was like, conference for women, let's talk about dealing with imposter syndrome. And then it's putting the onus back on the individual rather than being like, well, no shit, we feel like imposters if we're trying to exist in a world that was not set up for us.
There it is. It's like how over here we love to create capitalism and then make eggs 7 times more than they were last week, and then tell everyone that they're not working hard enough. well, if you were working hard enough, you could afford food.
No one wants to work anymore now.
I am truly like the parade leader of I also don't want to work anymore. I want to do this, and this doesn't feel like work. But I would love for it to not feel like work while I also got to eat. So it would just be really great if this could just be what I would call a like my meal ticket or something. But yeah, I am con work. I'm like, no, well, no one should be working. We should be letting the robots do it. It makes complete sense.
100%. I was talking to someone about that the other day. They're like, I can't imagine like not working. I'm like, really? I would quit everything in a heartbeat. But then I guess that the difference is, and what we were talking about is like, I've got a million projects that, like this, like podcasting, that I would do regardless, because yes, it doesn't feel anything like work. So,
well,
yeah.
I saw a meme where it's like, well, everyone wants to put down all of these trust fund kids for being like, oh, well, you only get to be a poet or an artist or a musician because you have a trust fund. But what the narrative should be is when all of your needs are being met and you don't have to worry about that, you then turn to creativity and creating something for yourself and expressing yourself. And I was like, well, that's beautiful. And that's why for 2024, I would like universal income in America. Like, whoever wants to do it.
I also think with that stuff, it's so tempting to always have to pick one position. It's like, I'm like, maybe someone with a trust fund is a poet, and maybe I don't have to have an opinion on whether I think that sucks or that's cool. Maybe it's just both in different ways at the same time. Maybe I'm more interested in like, well, is their poetry any fucking good for a start? Like, let's read the poem. But yeah, I think it's so easy now to feel like you have to have like a hot take or one opinion on a thing. And it's just, I find it like exhausting, because the second you've got one opinion, there's always a way you can problematize that, and there should be. Like, things are not stable like that.
One of the things that like really will kick into my imposter syndrome is when people still hold me accountable for the opinions I held when I was 15 years old. And I'm like, oh, 20 years have gone by. I believe I've read enough of the internet to have formed new opinions.
And how horrible if you hadn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, how dare you change your mind? How dare I fucking not change my mind? It would be insane to spend 20 years of your life and not change your mind with new information. That's where the real danger comes, is people who don't change their mind.
Exactly. And now, because everything has become so polarized, and it's like, well, this is my stance and this is my hill that I'm dying on, and all of it is like, no one is actually open to changing their mind, because it's like, I was a poser all along. And it's like, no, your situation changed. I thought I was going to be a teacher because I wanted summers off to raise kids, and now I don't want to raise kids or believe in the American education system. Like, sometimes that just happens.
Can we also just take a moment to celebrate the word poser, which you just said? And I was like, oh my God, there was a chapter in my life where that word featured a lot. Like, when you're 15, the idea of being a poser is that, I mean, but like, maybe that's what imposter syndrome is. It's just the adult corporate version of being like, am I a fucking poser?
Yeah. Am I being a tryhard?
Am I a sellout? This feels like I'm selling out.
Yeah.
Even the ways that I'll talk about things that have happened for the show, I will like downcast them like I know I'm a fucking sellout. Like when we got to put ads on the show so I can make like 30 cents every time someone listens to the ad, I'm like, well, I finally sold out to capitalism and now I'm going to make 40 cents every episode. And someone's like, right, but you also need to pay your mortgage. So I think your fans are going to understand that, like, now they're
40
getting
cents.
Yeah.
Brag
Ooh,
much?
Yeah.
Live and love. You know what though? I was thinking about this today while listening to your podcast and noting the ads. Do you know what that makes me feel as a listener? It makes me go, fuck yeah, good for you, Nat. You got some sponsors. That's great.
You and I are the same person, because I am a huge nerd and I talk about these people all the time. Someone's rolling their eyes somewhere. I love the Critical Role cast, and they are literally just a group of voice actors who are best friends who now stream while they are playing D&D. And it started, like all projects do, in someone's like living room with a backdrop behind them and like very poor video control. And then people liked it. So now they have a production studio and a merch line and they're selling books and whatever. And every time they do something, the majority of the fan base that you can access because they're on the internet is like, what a bunch of fucking sellouts. And we all have to remember that they're millionaires now. They're not on our side. And I'm like, bro, I don't know these people, but Laura Bailey and the rest of Critical Role, they're my friends. And I'm just happy that they're making money because they'll keep it for free if they're making money. I get to watch that for free.
It's such a weird thing, and it's definitely, like, it's very pronounced in Australia as well, this idea of, like, as soon as something reaches a level of popularity, it is deeply uncool. And it's like, it's some sort of personal offense to you if an artist or a podcaster or whatever that you once liked suddenly is popular and actually, yeah, like, able to quit their day job, making some money from a thing, but because suddenly it's popular, it is no longer cool. And then you get this level of hate from these people who purport to be fans of these things. And it's like, if you love this person, aren't you happy for them? I mean, and even if it's real sellout shit, who cares? Like, why does that hurt you?
There was a moment when Taylor Swift became a billionaire where I was like, yeah, Taylor Swift, go be a billionaire, play in that billionaire man's club. And then I also had to remind myself, like, there are no cool billionaires. They're all taking advantage of us. But I was like, I'm still happy for her, though. She can take advantage of me. She's the only one.
Taylor can take advantage. But it is that thing of, I think as well, it's always slightly misdirected where, okay, that is the exceptional example where someone became a billionaire, which is like a number we don't understand. We say it, our mouths say it, our brains do not even understand the scale of that. But with that aside, it's like most of the time, the person that you're tearing down for being this kind of like quote unquote success, it's like, no one's looking at people that are making the real money. Like, no one's gone to like whoever the fucking CEO of Shell is. I mean, like, that guy's sold out or whatever. Like, the people that are making bank at the top of capitalism are doing it in the kind of wherever they're doing it. And then everyone's like tearing down someone who's just like kind of gone from being like a small deal to like a mid-sized deal.
Well, like, because there's this expectation around artists and creatives that you should be doing it for the love.
Yeah. It's the same for teaching.
Right,
yes.
exactly.
And
Healthcare,
nursing, yeah. Female-led
and, you know, and how dare you want to be valued for your work, experience, talent, and just fucking hard work. And if you show any signs of wanting to monetize something or, you know, be able to actually live off it in a way where you don't have to also have an office job, work at a fucking call center or a cafe or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but if that's not what you want to be doing, then suddenly you're seen as the villain, you know?
Part of what gets my imposter syndrome like real riled up is that like I too am just living in a system that I know is abusive. So if I somehow won during that abusive system today, I don't know, do we get to celebrate that? It's like, well, I won capitalism today, so I guess like I get to go to the concert.
Yeah, well, and that I think is why the flip side of that being that kind of hashtag girl boss hustle culture is so toxic, because that's an example of winning and not wanting to acknowledge the discomfort of it. So it's like doubling down into that like capitalism girl boss ideology so that you don't have to sit with that icky discomfort of being like, this has got layers to it.
Do you know who I needed to feel like an imposter recently? I was influenced hard into listening to The Spare by Prince Harry.
I'm on the cusp. I'm 2 days behind you.
I've managed to avoid all of it thus far.
I have an hour left in the book. I was influenced hard. I listened to Celebrity Book Club, and I am a part of their actual book club. and they were all reading it and they were all giving opinions, and I was like, fine, I guess I won't wait until I'm 183rd on the library's list. I guess I'll download it. I needed Prince Harry, a very privileged white man, to feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome for a moment because he's in love with Africa. He's in love with Africa. He says that his soul was born in Africa. He was all of it. And at no point does he ever, at any point, go, and it's so odd for me to love a country that my family has a very, very awkward relationship with because we colonized Africa. And I'm like, that's what I needed you to do, Harry. I just needed you to admit one time that it's a little bit of a, I have a spiritual connection to Africa, but damn, I wish my family wasn't involved in it.
Yeah, or like all the stones on the crown jewels have been extracted from soil that probably wasn't in the UK.
Probably not. Fuck, that's bonkers.
How have you experienced? We're gonna turn this into like a book review of this book that like none of us give a fuck. Yeah, like what's the firstly? Would you recommend it as the broader worth it?
I was in it for petty royalty where I wanted them to hate all of one another, and they do. So I got it. I would skip the entire second part about his military career because that's where he's like, because now he's like, I'm the epitome of a man, but they won't let me up in the plane. It's like, sir, I don't understand why you thought that they were going to send you to war. Let's think this through. Let's think it through. It's wild. It's honestly wild, and it's one of those things where I'm like, this is what we need to be talking about. Like, Prince Harry literally feels like he has, like, his soul has ownership over Africa because it was the only place he ever smiled growing up. But I feel like I shouldn't make the same amount of salary as a man. Like, do we see the difference, everybody?
Oh man.
My granny used to message me or phone my mum whenever Prince, because I grew up in South Africa, and he came at one stage. He was dating a girl from Cape Town, and my
I know her.
You're aware. You're very much aware.
She's the one who allowed him to say that his soul was born in Africa because she said it and signed off on it. He was like, I'm gonna write it in my book.
she was the gateway drug. My granny used to like phone my mum to alert us so that we could be like in the same vicinity, because I think in her mind, like, she was British, my mum was born in the UK, and they immigrated, so there was this like idea that my grandmother had that we were going to be her ticket to the royal family. And at this age, can I just say, I was like the scruffiest, shittiest little like punk little rat you've ever seen. I'm like, there's no version of this where that's going to come true. But I loved that kind of like, I was like, wow, like Disney got their claws in. Like, it was still, that was like a possibility.
My grandma really believes that I too can be a princess, which is lovely.
I was like, have we met?
Because when I told my mom at Disney World that I was going to not go to college and instead learn my princess waves so I could be Belle in the parade, she said they want people who are pretty and talented, Natalie. And I live with that to this day.
Is this a true story?
Yeah. It's how as we know, memories are perception based, and it's how I remember it. I come from a very sarcastic family. So I was a sophomore in high school, so I'm sure I had also thrown out some jabs at some point, and now we're just like the royal family snipping at one another in the happiest place on earth. And my mom was like, don't quit reading books, Natalie. They need you to be pretty if they want you to be Belle. Come on.
Disney World's always been in my heart.
It's wild to me, that thing, that just going back to old mate Harry and his heart being born in Africa, that like whatever the flip side to imposter syndrome, which is I guess like a combination of arrogance and cluelessness.
Imposter syndrome?
Privilege.
But I think that a lot of like what's wrapped up in it is like we desperately don't want to come across like that, and we overcorrect. I think that's part of what that is too.
Well, and part of the girl boss like culture is like, well, you need to walk into every room with the confidence of a white man. And I'm like, hello, has anyone met a white man? They're not very confident, actually. You can hurt their feelings immediately and then they murder you. Like, that's how fragile they are. Like, they're not very confident. They have to kill the things that like hurt their pride. That's where we're at.
Yeah. And also, I want to walk into a room like me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know?
like a Jessamy.
Like a Jessamy.
Yeah.
Not like with the confidence of a white man. With the confidence of a fucking Jessamy G.
Yeah.
Which is shaky at best.
Which is like me peeking into the door being like, I'm allowed here, right? This is where I should be.
Nah, Jess, you've got some beautiful, fierce tiger energy, but also like anyone, not always, and this is fine. But something I remember hearing that I found super helpful in amidst all of this thrive, lean in girl boss narrative. And I can't remember, I think it might have been Deborah Francis White in The Guilty Feminist, but she made the point, and I just found this so helpful because it kind of just turned it into maths, where she was like, take the amount of people in the room or in the conversation and divide the time by those people, and then you have what your slice of the pie is. And that way you don't have to worry that you're overstepping, because if there are 3 of us in the conversation and we're all loosely aware that that means we get a 33% slice of the pie, then you're safe, because then you're allowed to take up space without worrying that you're going to completely bulldoze everyone else. Right?
Wow.
It's so simple, but I mean, that should just be like a thing that children learn.
Just like the logic behind that, because I am constantly being told that I'm the person who's too big in the room and like too much. Like, Natalie, no one needs one more joke. Oh, okay. I was once told by a man that the reason why dating me wasn't as fun as it could be is because when I'm in a room, it's like I'm dating everyone in the room and I give everyone time and attention and like laughs. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to turn that off. And he's like, oh, that's going to be a problem. I'm like,
What do you think he didn't like about that? That sounds like being in a relationship with the funnest person at the party, which is a good thing, is it not?
I think in my past, a lot of my exes have assumed that the thing that attracts them to me once they're dating me is only going to be for them. And then when I continue to not shift and continue to do the work of the room, they're like, but I called you my girlfriend. Are you not just going to save that for me? And I'm like, no, we're out. We're out in the world. I don't know. It's a very insecure based pattern that keeps coming up in the men that I date.
I think it's this thing of people being surprised when someone is exactly who they said they was.
Yeah.
I don't even know if
it
that
was on the box.
Yeah.
I don't know what you were looking at.
Yeah, but it's so true. I mean, I catch myself doing that as well. I think it's a human thing to do, but yeah, when you put it like that, Natalie, it's exactly the thing that you always were. Why would it be isolated to one use case?
It's one of those things where like the men I dated felt very highly of themselves and thought that they should only get my personality, and Prince Harry feels like he gets all of Africa. Like it's the same and not the same. The same. Do you guys know who the face of your imposter syndrome is? Like when your imposter syndrome talks to you, do you have a face in mind? Like the first person who handed you.
Oh, that's a great question.
That's so good. Do you have one?
It's my younger sister, my only sister. This could get me in a lot of trouble, but my sister is always telling me, and I don't even think that she means it, and I don't think that she means it the way that it comes across, but because my sister, there's so much that she can't envision herself doing that when I do something, it's always like, well, who do you think is going to care about that? Well, I guess I was going to care about that. And she goes, but do you think that other people care enough to have you call them and tell them about that? And I'm like, ooh, I guess no. Okay. So a lot of times, like, it'll be stuff that she says to me that'll pop up.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's her defending herself, or I guess her fighting that battle within herself. And then I guess that's often what happens, right? Is like that overflow of trying to protect someone else by shooting them down before they've even tried happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I mean, for me, I think it's mainly me. I was incredibly lucky to grow up with a particularly supportive family, especially my dad. Yeah. So lucky in a lot of ways to really be told, like, if you want to do something, like, you got to work hard, but you can do it. So yeah, I think it's mainly just like a gross, ugly side of myself. Probably to a lesser degree, an ex-friend, an ex-friend of mine. It was devastating to me. It's sort of the opposite of the guest we had on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, which was reconnecting with an old friend from high school. This whole situation was letting someone go who became incredibly toxic to me. I still, I talk about it as one of the great heartbreaks of my life, but it got to the point where I realized that this person was just, she was so, and not just me, it was other people in her life as well, pulling people down to be with her. And because I loved her, I took what she said so seriously. So if she said to me that I was being a terrible friend, or that it's a lot of the like, well, who are you to do this? And like, why would you think you could do that? And I believed her. I really believed her because I loved her and I trusted her. And it took me a really long time to realize that she was doing that to a bunch of people, and B, I couldn't help her. I couldn't help her because all of these things initially that I took very seriously. So I was just, I'm a very action oriented person. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what am I doing wrong specifically? Tell me. I will change it. I will do better because I'm interested in personal development. And after some time, I realized, it doesn't. I could be doing backflips for her with a blindfold on if that's what she was asking me for, but it's not going to make any difference because I heard someone else refer to another person as this the other day, and it's brutal, but I think it's very fitting, as a professional victim.
Wow.
Yes.
And that's kind of how she was going through her life, and the carnage that she was leaving behind her was actually extreme. And I still to this day think that she does not know that. She doesn't know just how much her behavior affected other people.
When it comes to those like professional victims, that's exactly how they operate, right? So because they're always here and we're all up here thriving, then they get to act that way because they're like, well, it's not like I'm happy. Do you think that maybe you would want to join us up here in the happiness instead of trying to drag us all down into this pit?
Yeah, exactly. It's really sad. It's really sad. But yeah.
I do understand, as I've like grown and processed a lot of the ways that people have talked to me out of their own victimhood, it does make me sad because I'm like, well, something about our lives and our society and whatever made you feel like the only way to get attention was to be sad or be dramatic or be complaining or putting someone else down or to be a professional victim. And we see it in all of our teen dramas. So it has to be something that's way more common than we talk about.
And I think as well with that, there's a bit of this idea, and this is another whole long story, but Jessamy and I share a therapist, which is amazing.
Happening on this podcast.
It's not couples counseling. We do not see her together, but we see her, the same person, separately. She's amazing. And the other day, I don't think we've spoken about this, the fairy lights on a corpse thing.
No.
So she said, so it relates to this, and it's this idea of drama, but she was speaking about how we were speaking about the end of relationships and how what so often happens is relationships end out of reasons that are incredibly boring. It's like you grow apart from someone, you grow out of love, you lose touch. Like these things happen really slowly and incrementally, and they're just fucking boring.
Yeah, logistics.
Yeah. Admin. It's like the stuff that ends these great loves are not necessarily great things. They're just dull, mundane, desperately heartbreakingly boring things. And she's like, we find that quite hard to deal with, that reality. So we take the corpse of the relationship and we put fairy lights on it to try spice it up a bit. And she's like, that is the drama, like the layer of narrative and drama that we write. Like the story that we write for ourselves to try give what is honestly just very mundane and banal, to try give it significance and try give it weight and meaning and fire and feistiness so that it's like worthy of the movie of our lives. And it's like, no, sometimes like that is in fact optional. The fairy lights are optional.
Not in my life. Not in my backyard.
Because I was just talking about this with someone when I'm not in like the room with my friends or whatever, and they're like not calling me very often or whatever. I'm like, well, what did I do? Because clearly I should have done something cataclysmic I didn't say that word right, but we're going to move on. I should have done something huge to make them pissed off at me or whatever. And then sometimes it's like, sometimes friends are just friends for a season. It just ran its course. No, I love that. Fairy lights on a corpse. It's very Peyton from One Tree Hill, like just making an art piece of like everyone leaves and sticking it on her bedroom all the time.
And
like that was it was her only hobby.
I think that this is the thing though, is so much of our sense of selfhood comes from stories, and we are humans that make sense of the world with stories. It's hard, like, of course we would take those models and kind of read our life through that lens. And I suppose that's the work of being an adult, is becoming self-aware and allowing yourself to write those stories when they serve you. Or she was like, when they're shared stories. So in any relationship, you do need meaning as well. You do need your own narrative, but it's, as long as they're shared, as long as it's not just you writing your own private stories onto something to try make it feel more important or excuse things that aren't excusable.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm in sort of two minds about it, because like the number of like you were saying the other week, Alice, like the number of stories I've written for no other reason than to hurt my own feelings is incredible.
Yes.
I mean, isn't like religion writing stories to find meaning, and things like death and tragedy? Like,
so those are examples of shared. Back to that was her thing. She kept coming back to is like, and it's not to say that they're all always right, but existing in a social state is writing shared stories and agreeing to share stories of when we decide things matter, when they don't. You can still have your own. I think it's also just being aware as well, but you do need it.
There have also been a lot of times where I'm sitting with someone on the phone or at dinner or something, and halfway through our experience together, I realized that I wasn't aware that we were in a fight. Like they've created some sort of narrative in their head, and I'm like, are we in a fight? I was like, are we mad? And like, and it's, whatever happened while they were in their own bedroom or in their own home or in the car or whatever, something made them ridiculously upset at me. And instead of just saying that, all of a sudden in the middle of a dinner, I'm like, why am I being punished? Why couldn't we get the appetizer I wanted? And it's literally because they've just made something up, and having to like work through how that's so much more about them than you. My biggest lesson this past year has been that I really have nothing to do with the way that people think about me.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, where we can all be guilty of that. You make assumptions about what someone's reaction to a certain thing is going to be, and then you've had this whole fucking conversation, argument with them in your own head before you even start the conversation. You've already decided that they're going to be negative or competitive, or that they're going to say no to whatever thing is you want to ask. So when you get into that situation, you're like going in like, well, and they're like, oh no, that's fine. You're like,
yeah.
Okay, but yeah, that's also been a big learning for me in the last couple of years, Nat, that you have no business or no control over what other people think of you. Like, you really don't. There's part of me that is like so intensely curious to know what I look like through someone else's eyes. And I think that's a human experience, but also I will never, ever, ever be able to know that. So I've just got to let it go, and it will be different for everyone.
I lose hours of my life just doing something because I'm like, well, what will they say about me if I'm not in the room because I chose to opt out of it or do my own thing or whatever. And it's something that I've always struggled with, where it's like I'm constantly finding myself in rooms that I didn't want to be in because I was too worried for the 12 people in the room to think I was selfish.
And I guess also I often not only project what narrative I think they've written, but there's some part of me that weights that as more important than my own appraisal.
Yes.
So it's like a double part. I'm like, that person thinks I'm a piece of shit. And the follow-up to that is, and they're right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, where are those two things happening? And like, and I treat, unless I reflect on it and notice the pattern, and I'm hopefully getting better at that, but I treat that as like gospel. Otherwise, I'm like, well, I guess if they don't like me, that they're correct in not liking me. They've seen the thing. It's the same way I'm like, every time I pick up someone's baby and it like remotely cries, I'm like, it sees my soul and knows that I'm bad.
Oh, 100%.
It's like a baby barometer, and it's just
And
seeing
now,
the truth.
Now everyone knows.
Exactly.
Now everyone knows that I'm a shit woman, and
someone's
babies cry when I touch them,
or someone's dog doesn't love me.
Well, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't deal with it when a dog doesn't like me, because I'm like I was like, one time I called the buffalo from the zoo because all of the zoo animals like me, but your dog has decided that they're too good for me. But one time I was at the zoo with a friend and a bird stalked up right in front of him and just started screaming. And I was like, what does the animal kingdom know that I don't know about you? Why is this bird so upset by your mere presence?
And if you'd had a subtitle, the bird is just yelling like, bird, bird, I'm a bird. Fucking idiot.
Like, wow. So wise.
I made him leave the bird enclosure. I was like, you have to go. You're upsetting everyone in here. You're upsetting Mother Nature, and we'll take this up
Right. Mother
later.
Nature has turned against you.
You know what's so interesting that's come of like talking to people via Zoom and stuff, as opposed to meeting in person, obviously, but also more so than phone calls these days. I am someone who has always been terrified of phone calls. Don't really know exactly why, but it feels like, and still to this day, like I will get on and do this with you happily. If I have to make a fucking doctor's appointment, order a pizza, get fucked. Don't want any of it.
Right, and fuck you for not having a website that I can just put my information into. It's already saved on my phone.
But I think what it is the ability to read people's facial expressions and body language. And I think, and I never would have come to this conclusion if we hadn't been thrust into Zoom world, I think that's the thing that gives me anxiety about the phone is like I have no additional information about you. How am I meant to know how you're actually feeling, or like something about your personality, or how like I can tune in to sort of match your energy or be on your level or whatever so we can develop a relationship. But if I can't see you for that extra information, I feel so uncomfortable. It's fascinating, yeah. That mean a lot.
I had that experience in the reverse, where I would find that I was physically exhausted after a Zoom call because I had no idea how much I emote from my face. And then the fact that it's like a bit pixeled and blurry, it's like without consciously meaning to, I just ramp that up 20% in order to communicate with the other person. But like by the end of an hour, I was like, fuck, my face like physically is exhausted. Like my muscles in my face feel so fatigued.
I am going to go out on a limb and say that like the Zoom and being able to see the way that I communicate to people and TikTok has actually helped my imposter syndrome. That might be something that like no one's going to be like, really? Social media helped you feel better about yourself? But it was the moment where I realized that I hated the way that the filters made me look, that I was like, oh, that's right, because I love my face and my face.
Yes! Fuck yeah!
Yeah.
And now there are still days, because men love to yell at me on YouTube for even having a podcast.
So you're going to say having a face.
Both.
I mean, they're probably pissed about that too. Her and her stupid face and her stupid podcast about how we're all mistreating everybody. There are days where like I can't do it. Like I can't conceptualize the TikTok or the Reels or the social media or whatever, because people have a lot of access to me because I am an oversharer. And then there are some days where I'm like, and now I will be in my cave with my cat watching Emily in Paris, like, and just watching trash. But a lot of the time, I'll make the stupid TikTok or whatever, post it, and then be like, I have the most beautiful eyes in the entire world. Who even gave me those? It's my uncle. My eyes are the exact. I have the lashes and possibly the coloring of my uncle. So, but yeah, I'm always, and it's one of those things where social media gets a lot of, and it should. Social media is one of those necessary evils where it's like you're either feeling great about yourself or you feel like trash and everyone else is like winning an Oscar today and you couldn't even get off the couch. But it was one of those things where I was like, I was not anticipating TikTok making me feel good about myself.
It's so interesting. I think, yeah, like everything, it's nuanced and complicated, and some of it's horrifying and some of it's great. But I would actually agree with that too. I think particularly with the podcast audience, that, you know, one of the reasons, well, we had a little podcast sleepover a few months ago to talk about, you know, sort of our intention and what we wanted to do with it. And it sort of came down to three things. Number one purpose is to hang out on purpose. Number two is to have conversations with interesting people about meaningful stuff. And number three is to share those conversations to help people feel less alone. And that third part around feeling less alone, particularly when you're sharing these things that are like, yeah, we are, as I said, also classic oversharers, but things around, yeah, like Christmas or being, you know, hurling towards your 40s, being childless, and these sorts of things, that it's almost easier to talk to a bunch of strangers about it. And those interactions that I've had, particularly through the social media channels with strangers, are some of the most heartwarming, affirming ones that I've had, because it's like, you don't have to love me. You know what I mean? Like, you're not my sister or my best friend or my dad. That you're not doing this to make me feel better. You're doing this because we share an experience. And to have those conversations with people, I have found to be, yeah, incredibly affirming. I just winked at Alice like a creep for some reason after I said all this lovely stuff, and then I was like, hey, I'm going to sign this off with a wink.
I was just absorbing it. I've been trying so hard to, when you were speaking about silences earlier, I'm trying so hard to be more okay with silence. But that's also quite a funny skill to work on, like, while part of your job is running a podcast. Because sometimes we'll be in an interview and I'm just like,
because Whitney Cummings gets so much, like, I projected Whitney Cummings' feedback onto myself because I feel very connected to who she is as a comedian. So because she gets so much feedback where it's like, you never let your guests talk and you're always ramroding to just make your point, I'll just sit here. And then people are like, oh, are you frozen? And I'm like, no, I'm allowing you the space to speak. And I have to consciously do it and literally grip myself to be making the point that you can now talk. I think that a lot, I only know of one ex who has ever listened to the show, but I feel like, and they would be justified in saying it, if one of the guys that I talked about messaged me and said, well, why didn't you ever tell me in the moment you were feeling that way? Very justifiable question. Why on earth didn't I tell you that I was feeling stressed or like taken advantage of or whatever? And I think that my answer would be, well, because when I was 22 years old, I didn't feel like I had the right to feel like I was being taken advantage of.
Yeah. Gosh, I would agree with that a lot, because you're trying to work things out in a world where you don't, like, something feels uncomfortable, but you're not entirely sure why. And when it's like, you know, the water that you're swimming in, the air that you're breathing, nothing is sort of giving you any hints that you have the right to push back on this thing. There are zero signs that you have the right to want more for yourself, or that this is in fact something that is odd.
And we feel like everything has like an expiration date, right? Like, oh, well, you pissed me off yesterday, but today is a new day. So I guess we'll just try it again, and we'll never address anything that's ever happened in our past because I didn't tell you in the moment, because I'm a delay feeler. I won't realize that I'm pissed off until I'm home and like sitting there watching something on TV and going, wait a minute, how dare they? And then I'm like, well, the moment has passed. I guess they'll live to hurt me another day.
My first like real job outside of, like part-time jobs you had during school or whatever was in the music industry. And when I think back about some of the shit that went on then, like I hope it's gotten a little better now, because that generation of men are literally dying. They're all having heart attacks and dying from all the fucking coke and cigars. At that time, it's from particular, like Australia, the industry is pretty small, right, comparatively to other places in the world, and very relationship based. And all those relationships were between the men, not all, but I would say 99% of them that were running shit in that industry at that time, this is in the early 2000s, were like cartoon characters of a villain. Like they were like, using outdated 80s slang and like smoking cigars and
pinstripe
having
suits,
lines in their offices and smacking the girls on the ass. And it's so, and I was really young, right? So I was like 20 when I started working in this industry. And everything about it was so exciting to me, because it's like, oh, there's people that I saw on the TV, and like it was this sort of like world of like, oh, I should be so grateful. There's 1,000 other girls who would want to be here doing this job. But when I think now back to just like the rampant sexism, verbal abuse, misogyny, horror show that was both that industry and my particular job, it makes me feel ill. But I think some of it I just didn't know. Like I just didn't know how fucked it was, because it was so ingrained in the culture of, the broader culture, but particularly the culture of that industry. And my initial reaction, I'm like, oh, but we were kids. Then I'm like, no. I was a kid. They were all fucking grown-ups. What the fuck? It was actually being allowed to happen here, yeah.
They were grown men who had control over my career and anywhere else I would want, like, because I love that tagline too, like, oh, you're going to act up here and not think that I'll tell the entire universe that you're not hireable.
Yeah, P.S. Everyone hated my boss. Like, he had zero credibility or power. He just had a lot of money.
Yeah.
Which I guess is power.
Yeah, so he did have power, but I mean, like, on a reputational scale. Like, if he was to say, like, don't hire Jessamy, that'd be like...
It would probably work in your favor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, I have kept you here for over an hour, which is something that I love to do before we actually get... And sometimes this is, like, the most feely part of the podcast, and then it ends up going longer, and I'm like, well, audience, you chose to be here. But we end every episode of To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with our two traditions. It's the, if I could leave you with one lesson, this is what it would be. And it could be about imposter syndrome or anything that we talked about today. And then to add a little bit more positivity that we're all in this together, we end an episode with a manifestation that we hope, so that one day maybe misogyny and the patriarchy aren't the only things that I talk about.
Can I go?
Yeah, please.
All right. So I'm going to do, it's a 2-in-1. So something about imposter syndrome that I've kind of not realized, but like, or realize while it's happening in real time, is I have this thing where like, if I don't get a turn, I'm quiet about it. Like, and it's sometimes harder when you feel like we spoke a lot about like spaces that are foreign or you're new in a space, but sometimes you can feel like an imposter, like even with your friends, and sometimes it's really hard. And earlier, I didn't get a turn to go when we were speaking about what my imposter syndrome looks like. And I'm raising it because this is something I would normally never say, but I know that this is completely the safest space to say it. And I think it's important because we can be with our friends, but like we all still have blind spots or we get caught up on other things. And I know, as for myself, it's also my responsibility to raise it, because I know that this is exactly the space where there is a platform for that. Like, that there's no one here being like, we need to silence Alice because we don't care. It's just like life was happening really fast, right? So mine is a double, because I know that if I was in almost any other space in this, I wouldn't feel confident enough to say this. But I'm like, no, I want to turn. I want to turn. And I know that you two would also want that for me.
Of
So,
course.
so I'm manifesting it now. And just,
Yes, please take your space and tell us who the face of your imposter syndrome
and here's
is.
the worst part about this is when you asked that question, I was like, oh, fuck, I do not want to answer this because it's a hard one, right? But I think for me, it's like, it would be my mum. And what's complex about that is that I love her and she's an amazing, amazing human and was a great mum in many ways and a flawed mum in many ways. And she's a very scared person. And I think when you, Jess, were describing your friend and that kind of feeling of someone who like brings you down, a lot of that was like her. And it came from a place of such love and it came from a place of like such protection. And it was just like, don't put yourself out there because if they don't love you, I don't want to see you get hurt. Or like, if you do this and fail, I don't want to see you get hurt. So it was coming from such a beautiful place, but also years and years of that kind of definitely pile up. So yeah, but I think also like now it's being able to, so for me, it's being able to recognize that voice and kind of be like, it's also not her, right? It's like, it's happening in my head and I've given it her voice and I've taken obviously a few moments from being a kid where it felt that way and I've woven them into this ghost, this chimera of a person who says that. It is actually me, which also means I can dismantle it in my own brain with the help of our dear therapist.
Yeah, our therapist.
But yeah, so that's my double, that's my imposter syndrome, and also kind of my hope for anyone listening is to also be like, there are places where you might feel like it, but you don't need to. And also like trust yourself and trust the people you're with to hold you in that space.
I'm so glad you said something because I feel like so much of the way that we think of ourselves comes from our moms. Like, honestly, because they were the people looking at us every day and trying to lead us into the right and wrong directions of life. They were also just people who happened to have a baby. Like, they weren't like guaranteed a master's degree in right and wrong. Yeah. So thank you. And thank you for giving yourself the space and demanding your space.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm thank you both for, it's a safe enough space to also to exercise that muscle, and I'm gonna start exercising it more outside of this conversation too.
Yeah, I'm also very glad that you put your parents. Mums are a big one. And I think as our therapist says, like, it's not always about the parents, but it usually is about your parents. Like, therapy is actually really easy. It's your parents. The end. Okay. Well, I guess if I was going to leave people with something, think about one of the things that comes up really often with a range of different people on our podcast, and that's that there's a stark difference between being a beginner and being an imposter. And you're always going to be a little bit shit at something at the start. And the joy of being a beginner and that sort of like sparkly, bubbly inspiration that comes with starting something new is wonderful. And that doesn't mean that you don't deserve a place there or that you can't play in a space where you are not an expert in something. And that's not being an imposter. That's just being a beginner.
That's a big one because I love to convince myself that I'm already bad at something I've never tried. Like, what would your hands do with that? You're bad at that.
And hey, also, even if you are bad at it, who cares? Like, if you're bad at it and you hate it, well, okay, probably not the hobby for you. But if you're bad at it but you love it, like, I'm not a good singer, but I will fucking kill a karaoke. I'm not good at it, but I enjoy it, right? So it's like, you don't have to, some things are just there for play. And even if you are bad at it, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to build a career on it or, be an expert.
Did you want to go ahead and do your manifestation too, or did you to keep up with the twofer theme?
Sure. I'm gonna think of one.
Or I could do my lesson while you think too.
Let's do that.
Okay. So, when it comes, I'm so glad, Alice, that you brought back into play the face of our imposter syndrome, because normally I have like some pillowcase, embroidery lesson for everyone, but this one's actually like practical and something I've done. During the quarantine, I did the artist way. And one of the activities is to write a monster story about the person who first made you feel bad about your own creativity, or that you shouldn't be doing whatever brings you creative joy. And I feel like you can take that and also do that with your imposter syndrome. Like, just write a really ridiculous R.L. Stein monster story about the person who you think embodies your imposter syndrome, because then once it's silly, or like something that you could take out with a sword or a nat 20 during a D&D round, then it becomes that much more easy to, and then you're taking it off of a person you know and making it some sort of slimy beholder monster.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, that ticks all of the boxes for me in terms of an activity, a creative activity,
some storytelling.
And useful. Storytelling. I don't know if this really sits under the banner of manifestation or not, but this is what is kind of on my mind, and it comes from another of the things that comes up often over a range of different guests talking on imposter syndrome, that there seems to be a few sort of antidotes or ways out of it. They'll be different for different people. There is no 100% guarantee in this offering. One is around exploring your own identity and finding your own style with something, and then that's perhaps an easier thing to do if you're, say, an illustrator or a writer. Suddenly you don't feel in competition with anyone else because you're doing it like you. And the other thing is that it doesn't matter. No one else is, and I mean that in the most positive, loving way possible. No one else is thinking about you as much as you are. And again, I say that in the most loving, positive way possible. And isn't that fucking good? Isn't that liberating? You can go ahead and do whatever you want, and in all likelihood, it does.
I think my manifestation, it's changed like 3 times as we've been talking, but I think my manifestation is going to be something that me and my best friend Stephanie have been repeating to ourselves throughout the entire year/holiday seasons. But I hope that no one finds themselves crying over the people who will never be crying over you. So it's create within yourself this space to be safe and loved, and then build in that confidence that you are a loving and good person. And like you said, it doesn't matter if they get it, because if they were meant to get it, they would have seen it. So no more tears for people who won't spill tears over you.
I love that.
Thank you so much, Nat. This has been so fun.
It's been so fun for me. I love that we're already friends. I don't have to remind you that we're friends.
Absolutely not. Your best friend.
You are invited back whenever you want to talk about toxic music industry stories. I got stories about Kesha. I'm a big Kesha stan, and I believe that Kesha deserves all of our love and support, and that she was handed a bad reputation and we never saw the true evilness that was plaguing her. So I know a wild amount of stories about Kesha and Britney and all of them, all my little 90s pop divas. But please let everyone know where they can find you and also get to talk to you and be besties with you.
Yay! Yes. Well, the name of our podcast is the Imposter Syndrome Club. You can find it on all podcast platforms. You can find us on Instagram at imposterpod, and online at impostersyndromeclub.com.
That was so eloquent.
Isn't she amazing? I've been practicing all day.
Yes.
Worth it.
Yes. I have started to feel ridiculous every time I go to all the men I've tolerated before, your weekly look at everyday misogyny, because I feel like a flight attendant when I say it now. Like, I'm just like, and to the exit, you will find where I would like to leap away from the patriarchy.
I'm there. Blow up the slide. Let's get out of here.
And tolerators, you know the deal about all of the social media and all the ways to help support the podcast, because I was handy dandy enough to put a little reminder at either the beginning or the end of this recording. So remember out there, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including fake arguments with people that you've never had but you stressed out about. Smiles are for people.